Your Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Kavanagh, has been described in the most, Varadkar has been described in the most extraordinary language. The Sun newspaper called him, I think, a Boy Scout. Someone else said he was arrogant. There was a reckless miscalculation when he put down his red line over saying we cannot move on to the next stage of talks if there is no written guarantee about not having a hard border. Jennifer, what's your response to these comments?
Well, the main issue is that the border has been so troublesome from the time that it was actually created in the first instance. And now with it being an issue with Brexit, are we going to have a hard Brexit or a hard border, soft border, almost like an egg? Are we going to have a medium well-done border at this stage? And when you look back on it, there's issues like the Foyle estuary, which still haven't been sorted since partition. So you have an area of land where they're not even quite sure where the boundaries actually are, and then you're going to stick another heavy border on top of that.
But when you hear this sort of incendiary language in the British press, and indeed from some British politicians, I mean, Nick Timothy, formerly the closest advisor to the Prime Minister, said today that he'd made a disastrous miscalculation by putting down this red line. What's your response?
Well, journalists are entitled to write what they want to write within the...
And politicians?
Exactly within the boundaries of defamation law. But at the end of the day, Leo Varadkar has a position to fight for, and that's to try and get the best deal that there is for the Irish that are crossing the border day to day. People are trading across the border between north and south. There has to be some degree of certainty as to what's going on.
Jonathan, Isaby, were these newspapers and politicians right to use that kind of language today?
Well, I certainly think the Taoiseach has massively overplayed his hand. And actually his behaviour has been rather odd, because for most of this year, his words and rhetoric have been very warm towards the British government, who have been saying throughout this year there won't be a hard border. The Belfast Agreement will be enshrined in the negotiation and the end agreement with the European Union. And yet it was kind of 3 weeks ago that the Taoiseach suddenly started to up the ante about this hard border. Theresa May has said throughout there will not be a hard border. There will only be a hard border if Ireland decides to put one up.
Neale Richmond?
With respect to Jonathan, that's a ridiculous comment. The Taoiseach has been consistent, as is his predecessor, Enda Kenny. Ireland set out long before the Brexit referendum, must put this on the table. We didn't want Brexit. We didn't choose it. It's a decision of the British people, which we respect wholly. But we've been consistent since the referendum that there's top three negotiating issues before we move to phase 2, one of which is the situation on the island of Ireland. And consistently through the process, we've said we're prepared to move to phase 2 whenever the British government provides us with the necessary detail. They have yet to do so. We've missed one deadline in October, and it's understandable that we just are getting slightly frustrated. We want to move on to phase 2, and we're not going to be pushed into it without the detail.
But you can't move on to phase 2 about the trade unless you know what the situation is on the border. These issues are all intertwined.
Then why did the British government agree at the outset with the European Commission negotiation task force?
Dare I say it?
No,
this is let me finish my
goodwill
towards the European Union.
And the European Union and the Irish government has shown extreme goodwill to a government who's made a decision that affects us more than actually affects the British citizens and the people of Europe. We don't want this.
Okay.
We're dealing with the mess of it. We're very clear. We will move on to phase 2, but we have to be quite clear that we need the detail. We haven't had the detail. We've had a lovely speech. We've had a position paper. We need the detail, and hopefully that'll come over the weekend.
Let's get the union's view from Ben Lowry.
Well, I don't think that if the Irish government is going to play hardball, and it is playing hardball, it can get upset at commentary and at angry reaction. I think it's a tactical choice for them whether or not they want to play hardball. They're saying that they're not going to use a veto and that they have the support of the rest of the EU. If they have the support of the rest of the EU, then that's a problem for the UK. But I want to emphasise how hardline the Irish government is in this. I was at a speech last week in Belfast by Simon Kavanagh, who's now Leo Varadkar's deputy. And he said that they wouldn't accept checks at the border, they wouldn't accept checks away from the border, and they wouldn't accept checks, for example, in farmyards. So that's quite explicitly saying that no matter how much the British government tries to alleviate the problem, it won't accept it. I think his words were, we won't stand for it. So he's creating a situation where unionists in London are going to say, well, if you want a border in the Irish Sea, we won't stand for that.
We said we wanted a border.
Let's bring in Nicola Byrne. You represent industry, you represent business. When you hear politicians or political commentators talk like this, does that fill you with optimism?
Well, I'm a bit dismayed that the facts aren't the facts. And this morning, even on our national radio, we have members of politics giving out that our biggest trading partner is the UK, when that's just simply not true. And while the border is hugely important, we only trade 14% of our exports with the UK.
14%?
14%.
1-4?
1-4.
And most of the rest goes to the EU?
No, 29% goes to America, and the rest then is travelled around the world.
So
88% of our exports are foreign direct investment companies. We don't trade beef, beer and butter. We trade high-grade fine chemicals. We trade services. We trade tech. Half the chips in the world are made here in Ireland. Every computer in the UK has probably had a computer chip from Ireland.
And so are you saying that because you trade 14% with the UK
Yes.
and more with other people,
Yes.
that allows you, that puts you in a better position to draw the red line that Leo
Yes,
Varadkar is
because
drawing right now?
Ireland is now, we are Europe. We're not Ireland. And you're negotiating with Ireland as if we're just some small, tiny little country, which we are compared to the Great Britain that
Let's
is
go
next
to
door
a
to
former
us.
Irish ambassador to Canada. So, what do you make of
I
all
think the
this?
first thing we need to do is de-escalate the rhetoric, and a lot of the rhetoric's not helpful. But there's lies, damn lies, in statistics. Okay, we export between 14 and 16% by value of our goods to the United Kingdom. It's actually almost 40% by volume. So it is. You can put it all around whatever way you like, but it's very, very important relationship, and it's important that we nurture that relationship. And I'm a bit dismayed at how it has come apart, because in these negotiations, we actually have a common goal, which is we don't want a border and we want the freest possible trade across the Irish Sea. So let's try and work on what we've got in common rather than start, insulting each other or issuing ultimata.
Is Ireland disrespecting the democratic will of the British people as expressed in the referendum, Jennifer?
Of course we're not. I mean, the people of the UK voted for Brexit. We all have our own opinions on that particular standpoint, but that is the vote. That is what the majority of the people in the UK want. It might be useful to give them maybe another opportunity to look at it when we actually know the terms of what's going on.
But Jonathan, do you agree with that? I mean, or do you feel that your will is being disrespected?
I think that when the message came from Dublin that there had to be Northern Ireland within the customs union for things to work, I think people felt that was inappropriate.
What about
But
our
do
will,
bear in
Jonathan?
mind the
What about our
votes
will?
with the European
Well,
Union.
your
There are
will-
different
Well,
aspects now that
well,
you're pulling out of.
The will
Our will to protect the Good Friday Agreement, our will to stay within the European Union, our will to make sure that our relationship with the UK rightly stays the closest possible relationship. You've made this decision. We haven't. You have yet to come with proposals about what Brexit will look like, what the border will look like. We're now in December. We missed the deadline in October. And rhetoric, with respect from unionist politicians such as Sammy Wilson and Lord Mulroney, is extremely unhelpful, using racist slurs to our Prime Minister. We've been very, very direct and throughout the process.
Okay, well, let's just get a response from a unionist. What do you think, Ben? Racist, inflammatory rhetoric?
Well, I mean, you're talking about one or two individuals.
I know.
Sammy Wilson isn't just one or two individuals. He's one of the leading members of the DUP. He's one of 10 people that support the Conservative government, making remarks at the stage at the DUP party conference.
Yeah.
Lord Mulroney is a different example. I know I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but you know what I mean. That doesn't help. And then everyone's trying to accuse that we're trying to push through United Ireland by stealth and all that. We're not.
I actually think this is an important point about what's really going on. What's really going on is that there is a view in Scotland amongst Scottish nationalists, and there's a view amongst nationalists in Ireland, that Brexit doesn't have legitimacy in those two places. It is a problem that it didn't get a majority in those two places. But I look at it the other way round. One of the astonishing things to me about Brexit is that there wasn't that much divergence between the countries. England was a little bit more than 50% in favour. Wales was a little bit more than 50% in favour. Scotland was almost 40% in favour of Brexit, and Northern Ireland was well over 40%, almost 50% in Brexit. In other words, across the UK, there was a very high level of scepticism. It's a pity that there wasn't a majority in those countries. And I think what's actually happening with Dublin is that it's thinking that there is a sense that it's a move away. We've Graham Gudgeon, a former advisor to David Trimble, writing in tomorrow's paper, newsletter, saying that it is a move away from the gradual long-term trend towards United Ireland if it works.
Do you believe that, by the way?
No, I think the biggest problem for trade at the moment is that politics is the person who's supposed to clear the path for trade. And I had said to Jonathan
It's working
earlier,
the other way around.
it's actually working the other way around at the moment. And business is going to do what business needs to do to protect itself. And that is not in any of our interest. We have to work closely together. Trade is to protect people and bring them out of poverty. This in-house political fighting has got to end. We've got to focus on a win-win. And we're not anywhere near it as this rhetoric just keeps continuing. We have to keep that border protected because we can't go back to bandit days. The only reason it's important is we have farmers, we have food. As Ray said, it accounts for an awful lot of jobs on that border. Our businesses, our members are on that border. They take staff from one side of it, they take supply chain from the other. We cannot have it back as a border.
so
it is vital to trade.
This trade issue is so important, and this is why the Irish government should be pushing for phase 2 of the talk so that we can talk about trade and have as free
We're
Europe. If you have a border, with respect, and you don't deal with customs, you don't deal with regulatory convergence, how can you talk about trade? So you want to move ahead. The UK government agreed to this process. The UK government are now trying to force ahead of it. We have agreed there's 3 issues: citizens' rights, the bill, and the situation on the island of Ireland. We need to get significant progress on that. We have not got that.
If we can move to a full free trade deal between the EU and the UK, then
we want what we have at the moment, which is
let's bring Jennifer. Hang on a minute, Jonathan. Jennifer, is there a legal framework that you can envisage with your legal mind that would actually make this work, that could square this circle?
The problem is there is so little concrete information coming from both sides that if you want to look at it with some sort of legal eye, you need to have some idea of the facts that are coming from both sides. And there actually isn't anything, as in there's a halfway house that we might be able to meet here. You're hearing things like electronic border tags, but then they'll be taken off the table. So for business, for law, for politics, everything, we need to have some idea of where there can be a halfway house in this to actually move on for everyone.
Here's another solution. Ray Bassett, you wrote in an article quite recently that I read that actually Ireland should do what it did back in '74 when it joined with Britain. It should also leave with Britain. Yeah. And Irexit, I think you call it.
Yeah, well, I think in Irish society we've had a lot of sacred cows and there's been a lot of deference and that. And in Ireland, it was almost sacrilegious to question the EU. Now, there's no doubt that membership of the European Union has been very beneficial for Ireland, particularly...
So are you serious about this possibility of leaving?
But the balance is changing. As the European Union changes and as our circumstances, particularly, if there's going to be a hard border, there's going to be a no deal, then we have to look very seriously at the advantages and disadvantages. And also remember, our net contribution to the European Union has been estimated next year as probably 500 million. So our bill is going way, way up and the advantages are shrinking. So we've got to look at when we reach the tipping point.
OK, who's going to join Ray Bassett to leave the EU?
Absolutely not.
Nicola?
No, absolutely not. In fact, Ireland is so well positioned at the moment because with the walls coming up in the States, with Brexit being an emigration issue, the only place in Ireland that we're going to gain from is all those jobs because we have borders that are open. We are centre of the universe. Our Taoiseach was actually right. We are an island at the centre of the universe. We have everything to gain by staying in Europe and very little to lose at this point.
When you were on your knees during the financial crisis,
yes,
the Germans came for you and the French came for you
and the English.
Not everyone was happy about it. The Brits helped you out with 7 billion quid.
And guess what? We took the austerity. But we took the austerity and the business, everybody...
But not everyone is happy about being at the mercy of France and Germany in the EU.
They want Britain on your side. We trade openly.
Important. This is the sort of rhetoric that came through the United Kingdom for the last 40 years that led to Brexit, because it's rhetoric that went unchallenged. Everyone says you're at the mercy of some Franco-German alliance, as if there's no equality in the European Union. And unfortunately,
so you trust the Germans and the French?
Yes.
I trust
the
the 26 other member states, because ultimately the United Kingdom have made the decision to leave. There's a reason, Ray, that 85 to 90% of the Irish population are currently in favour of Remain. They're the highest numbers in the EU, just short of Luxembourg, because it has been wholly beneficial to this country. As you mentioned, trade at the moment, the UK is worth 12%. It was 60% in 1973 when we joined.
Let me ask just one question to Ben. Now, we asked the DUP to come on the programme. They couldn't send anyone, so we have you as a unionist writer here. Today, the DUP more or less, said quite clearly to Theresa May, if you don't support us on this, if you give in to the Irish, then we will pull the plug on this government in London. Do they mean that?
Well, our emerging front page tomorrow is Sammy Wilson MP, who is strongly pro-Brexit, essentially saying that. But I'm wondering whether there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't able to hear your interview of Gary Gibbon, but the Times report this morning was talking about convergence in some areas. I'd want to know what that is, want to know what the constitutional implications are. One thing's very clear. Northern Ireland can't stay in the single market and the customs union. That would certainly mean a border in the Irish Sea. And it would be the move towards Irish unity, which very many people on this island understandably want.
Okay.
Well, can I just...
All right, just very quickly, yes.
Very quickly, we already have a foreign nationals customs in our two airports. We have Shannon and we have Dublin, and we both have US immigration sitting in the middle of that. We're the only people in the world that aren't connected to mainland America to have that. We are not opposed to trade taking really creative solutions. We just haven't seen any, and it's really important for trade to have that.
Let's talk specifically, actually, before we talk about the Good Friday Agreement, I want to just get back to the DUP threatening to pull the plug on the government in London. Neale, what would your response be to that?
I think it's a very reckless line to make. The DUP are convinced that we're trying to achieve a united Ireland through stealth. We're not. We gave up that aim when we removed Articles 2 and 3 from our constitution. We just want to make sure that the situation on the island of Ireland remains as positive as it is at the moment.
But I think there is a sense that the DUP feel that the government of Ireland is trying to dictate exactly how things should be in Northern Ireland.
If we had an executive in Northern Ireland, it would really help to have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
I'm sure we couldn't do that anyway, because Articles 2 and 3 have reunification based on consent from both Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there is no way that you can take Northern Ireland by stealth. That just cannot happen.
But let's face it, the DUP's never had it this good, so they're probably not going to do this, are they? Ben?
Well, I would have thought that, look at it the other way around, the government isn't going to want to do anything to alienate the DUP. I was at the DUP conference recently, and the one thing that there is an absolute determination amongst DUP and Conservative MPs is to avoid a general election.
Okay, let's talk about the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, the Good Friday Agreement was conceived very much on the assumption that Britain and Ireland would remain members of the European Union. That is now no longer the case. Does this imperil the Good Friday Agreement?
I see absolutely no reason why it should, not least because the British government have said that keeping the Good Friday Agreement will be part of the exit agreement. They agree with the European Union. And the Good Friday Agreement was not a creature of the European Union. I mean, if anything, America had more involvement in bringing the parties together and bringing peace to this island.
Jennifer?
In the preamble, it mentions membership of the European Union. And another part of that is the willingness and the fact that the Conservatives want to remove the European Convention on Human Rights, which I know is separate from the European Union, but it is also part of a continuing narrative about removing European elements into the English legislative process. And the problem with that is a common human rights standard for both Ireland and the UK, which is underpinning the Good Friday Agreement, which could be up for renegotiation.
Let's be really clear. Is anyone here genuinely worried that if this thing isn't sorted out properly, if we don't find the right language and the right solution, that the troubles could start again?
Yes.
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Ben?
Well, I think there's always a small risk of the trouble starting again. But
does this increase that risk?
I think one of the problems about talking about a return to violence is this. The dissidents are already, there's some very, very violent people out there. And we need to look at it the other way. If that small number of people do return to violence, we want to see cross-border cooperation. All this talk about Brexit and so on, an absolute determination to crush that. We've been there before. We went through a deal that was unpalatable to many of us. In the post-9/11 age, I hope we're all agreeing that terrorism is not going to in any way, even influencing things from the sidelines, have an impact.
Trade will be so impacted if that happens. So it's in no one's interest.
Okay,
there's two clear threats.
I was part of the Irish government.
You'll agree
quickly, I've got one last question for all of you.
There's two clear threats to the Good Friday Agreement. If we don't get an agreement in relation to customs, that means we need the infrastructure, be it sensors on the ground, and both. And then the second thing is what impact it will have on, indeed, intelligence sharing amongst the European Union police forces.
I would say that one of the great achievements of the agreement was essentially to remove the kind of water where these people who were causing difficulties were swimming in. If we create the circumstances again, particularly in the border area, then we're endangering. I don't like anyone to predict that the troubles will start again, but we're certainly creating conditions which will make it more easier for it to start.
Okay, hang on a minute.
But
final question.
It's not just a security issue. You don't.
Final question to all of you. Who thinks here there'll be a deal by the time we have the summit on the 14th of December? Deal?
Yes.
Deal?
I tend to think that there will. I certainly hope so.
Yes
or no?
It would be
outrageous if Dublin. I think there will.
Okay. Deal?
I'm not quite sure about
Not quite sure. Neale?
Yes, if London actually provides detail.
Jonathan?
Yes, there will be a deal.
There will be a
Stage
deal.
2, yeah.
Nicola?
Yes.
So actually, there will be a deal. There will be a deal on the border. All this sound and fury, we'll get a deal on the border.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
It's going to be really interesting the next few days and weeks. Ray, Ben, Jennifer, Neil, Jonathan and Nicola, I haven't got time to do your full titles, but it's been an absolute joy to be sitting here with you in the Glass Palace at the Convention Centre in Dublin. And thanks to